Picture the arrivals hall at JFK on a Monday morning in 2019. Families pushing carts stacked with luggage, business travelers moving fast, tour groups holding signs, a dozen languages bouncing off the ceiling. That was America as the world's #1 destination. Now walk into that same terminal today. The carts are still there, the signs are still lit, but the sound is different. It is quieter, much quieter. Some of the country's biggest international airports have lost more than half of their foreign passenger traffic. At certain airports, the decline has hit 75% compared to 2019 levels. That is not a dip. That is not a COVID correction. That is a structural shift happening right now. This is not a political argument. It is a data story, and we are going to walk through 15 airports that are all telling the same version of it. Starting with the number that stopped us cold. Hawaii has not changed. The water is still the same color. The sunsets still happen on schedule. The change is in the departure halls on the other side of the Pacific. Japanese tourists once made up more than half of Hawaii's entire international visitor base. Their numbers have declined by 81% compared to 2019. 81%. More than 40 duty-free shops at Honolulu's airport have permanently closed. Not because the merchandise was wrong, because the volume of buyers is gone. For decades, Hawaii was Japan's vacation annex, the honeymoon, the family trip, the retirement vacation. That relationship was deep and economically foundational. What shifted was not a single policy or incident. It was the accumulation of perception. Across Asian social media, a recurring theme appeared. Travelers sharing the feeling that the welcome did not feel as warm as it used to. No official statement confirmed this, but in travel decisions, perception functions as fact. The competitive landscape has also restructured fundamentally. Southeast Asian destinations are closer. Total costs are lower. Entry requirements are simpler. For a traveler weighing budget, ease, and emotional comfort, the calculation that used to resolve automatically in Hawaii's favor now often ends somewhere else entirely. The paradise has not disappeared. It has simply stopped being the automatic first answer. Portland built its international appeal on a specific identity. Outdoor culture, independent creative energy, a Pacific Northwest personality that felt genuinely distinct from every other American city. It drew a particular international visitor, especially from Europe and Australia, specifically seeking that differentiated experience. In just 2 years, Portland lost approximately 75% of its international passenger traffic. Picture a long-haul flight from Europe carrying 200 passengers. Previously, that aircraft was nearly full. Today, a small number of rows are occupied. The rest is empty airspace. The Oregon forest has not changed. The city's creative fabric did not collapse, but Portland's international image shifted sharply. News cycles focused on protests and civil unrest ran for extended periods across international outlets. A viewer in Sydney or Frankfurt does not analyze this coverage critically. They process the composite image and ask one question: will my family feel safe here? Australian travelers who used to route through Portland are now booking Vancouver instead. Same climate, similar scenery, lower perceived risk. Portland once promoted its deliberate weirdness as a brand advantage. The global travel market right now is rewarding predictability. Trust built across decades can destabilize in a much shorter window. Now move to the desert. Las Vegas was built from nothing on one premise: that people will cross oceans for the right experience. The numbers say something very different now. In just a few years, the number of international visitors to Las Vegas decreased by about 62% compared to 2019. Out of every 10 foreign travelers who used to land in Vegas, fewer than 4 are making that trip today. More than 50% of international bookings at high-end properties have evaporated. Rooms that were waitlisted on weekends are sitting dark. Not because the lights got turned off, because no one checked in. This is not seasonal. This is a pattern. Vegas was never really selling gambling. It was selling a feeling. The idea that you could arrive as an ordinary person and spend 3 days living like someone completely different. That feeling has a price. For decades, the world happily paid it. The problem now is that the price has multiplied at every step. Airfares up, resort fees ballooned. A visa process that for many nationalities means months of waiting and an in-person appointment before a single hotel has been searched. And in a world where Dubai and Tokyo and Singapore are sitting on the comparison screen right next to Vegas, the calculation does not always land in Nevada's favor anymore. Vegas has shifted from a default dream to a line item on a spreadsheet. New Orleans does not compete on scenery. Every major city has scenery. New Orleans competes on identity. The food is its own culinary tradition. The music is embedded in the streets. The architecture is a living conversation between 3 centuries of cultural overlap. But even a genuinely irreplaceable product can lose market share when accessing it becomes prohibitive. International travelers through Louis Armstrong Airport fell more than 62% in a single year. The Mardi Gras Festival, which once pulled enormous international crowds, now draws fewer than 4 out of every 10 foreign visitors it used to attract. The celebration continues. The gap in the crowd is widening. The cost stack for a New Orleans trip has grown at every level. Travel taxes, insurance premiums driven by Gulf Coast weather risk, and the sustained inflation of American hospitality pricing mean the total spend for a New Orleans experience has moved well past what comparable cultural destinations in Europe or Asia now require. New Orleans is selling authenticity. The final invoice is entirely real. At some point, the emotional pull and the budget constraint stop moving in the same direction, and the budget constraint wins. Culture is not infinitely price elastic. The market is demonstrating that right now. Now move north, to Detroit. Detroit Metro Airport once ran on industrial rhythm. The rhythm of manufacturing, corporate headquarters, and the consistent transatlantic business traffic that kept its international gates busy through every quarter. International passengers through Detroit are down approximately 59% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Where 10 international flights once arrived during peak hours, 4 are landing now. The ripple through the surrounding economy is immediate and measurable. A rideshare driver who once completed 8 to 10 airport runs every single day now sometimes sits through an entire morning shift waiting for a single pickup. That is one driver. Multiply it across every driver, every hotel, every restaurant operating near that terminal. Airport passenger volume is not a travel statistic. It is an economic foundation. Direct international routes carry more than passengers. They carry investment decisions. Every additional connecting flight an executive must add to reach Detroit from Frankfurt or Tokyo makes the trip harder to justify. In business, harder math produces fewer trips. Detroit spent years building a credible comeback narrative after the industrial decline. The revival story was real, but global connectivity is oxygen for that kind of resurgence. Narrow the access, and the recovery has to work harder just to stay at the same altitude, let alone gain any. There is a specific kind of silence that settles into a large terminal when the footfall disappears. The architecture has not changed. The lighting is still running, but the acoustics shift. You start hearing your own footsteps. That is the experience at O'Hare's International Terminal right now. 4 international gates have been closed due to lack of flights. Routes that once ran daily to Frankfurt, Seoul, and Toronto have been eliminated or reduced to a fraction of their former frequency. International passengers through Chicago are down more than 55% compared to 2019. For every 10 international travelers who used to move through O'Hare, fewer than 5 are making that journey today. Chicago is still the 3rd largest city in the United States. The skyline has not shrunk. The food culture is still world-class. But tourism decisions are not made on lists of objective amenities. They are made on gut feeling. And since 2020, Chicago's gut feeling in international media has shifted. The stories that reached global audiences were not about the architecture and jazz. They were about unrest and instability. A family in Munich does not read long-form local policy analysis before booking a flight. They read the headline and ask one question: will we feel comfortable walking around at night? That question, running through millions of minds simultaneously, equals hundreds of millions of dollars in lost bookings. Now move to the West Coast. San Francisco built its global reputation on one specific promise: come here to see the future being assembled in real time. Technology, creativity, ambition. If you wanted to understand where the world was heading, you flew into SFO. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, 6 international airlines pulled their SFO routes entirely. More than 800,000 international passengers disappeared from the airport's quarterly numbers compared to the same period the previous year. To contextualize that, 800,000 people is roughly the population of a mid-sized American city, and all of them stopped showing up simultaneously. The brand equity has not vanished. The Golden Gate is still one of the most photographed structures on Earth. Silicon Valley still produces companies that reshape daily life globally. But San Francisco's street-level reality has been a sustained subject in international media for several years. The composite impression landing in foreign markets is not favorable. One Canadian traveler described it precisely. They said they used to dream of walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. Now they think twice. Not because the bridge changed, because the confidence surrounding it no longer feels certain. The city that invented the tools used globally to search and book travel has developed a friction problem with its own global travel reputation. The irony is real. Orlando built its entire identity around families. The model is generational by design. You bring your child. 20 years later, that child brings their own. The machine runs on memory and emotion. The machine is grinding. Hotels near Orlando's airport are operating at approximately 35% capacity. In a 100-room property, 65 rooms are dark on a given night. Only 1 in 5 Canadian parents now say they plan to choose the U.S. as a family vacation destination in the next 3 years, down sharply from 4 in 5 previously. And for the first time in more than 20 years, a major Orlando theme park reported a financial loss during the summer quarter. Summer, in Orlando. Family travel is not impulsive. It is a 6-month planning cycle built around a child's wish list. But the planning process now runs directly into practical obstacles that competing destinations have quietly removed. A family in Vancouver can receive Japanese e-visa approval within days. The same family applying for a U.S. visa may wait several months. The child does not understand processing timelines. The child just knows which destination they will reach sooner. American theme parks invest billions perfecting the on-site experience, and then the path to the front gate involves more friction than it has ever required before. Now move to the East Coast, to a city built on a very different kind of symbolism. Philadelphia carries the weight of American origin. Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, the founding documents of the Republic. If any American city should project institutional confidence and functional order, it is Philadelphia. The data from the past year tells a different story. In the first 6 months of the most recent reporting period, the rate of 1-star airport reviews at PHL increased by 300%. International visitor numbers dropped nearly 40% in the first half of 2025. An airport is the first handshake of a city, the initial impression before any other impression is possible. Long waits, malfunctioning baggage systems, and staffing shortages during peak periods do not each constitute a catastrophe alone, but they accumulate. Patterns become reputations. Reputations become booking decisions. Travelers absorb delayed flights. They tolerate bad weather. What they struggle to forgive is the feeling that no one is managing the situation, that no one is accountable for the experience they paid thousands of dollars to have. The city that codified the operating principles of modern governance is currently struggling with the operating principles of its own transit hub. That gap is now measuring itself in visitor numbers that may not return quickly. Run this comparison carefully. You are in Colorado. You want to fly to Florida to visit family. The round trip costs close to $900. Now consider this alternative. That same $900 gets you a round trip to Lisbon, Portugal, with money remaining for a dinner overlooking the Atlantic. This is not a hypothetical designed to score a rhetorical point. This is the actual calculation that American travelers are running right now. In the first half of 2025, Denver Airport cut more than 400 domestic flights from its schedule. Over that same period, American overseas travel increased by 37%, while domestic travel volume fell significantly. Americans have not stopped flying. They have redirected where they fly. Denver was the geographic hub that connected every quadrant of the continental network. Its central position made it functionally essential. But when domestic routes that used to be affordable have pushed past the cost of a European vacation, the domestic network loses its own logic. Flying from Denver to Los Angeles can cost more than flying from Denver to Athens during a promotional window. Dinner in Lisbon is sometimes cheaper than lunch in Miami. There is a phrase circulating among American budget travelers right now. If you want to save money on a U.S. vacation, leave the United States. It is sardonic. It is also financially accurate for a growing portion of the American public. When the country's own citizens find international destinations more accessible than domestic ones, the empty seats are not just an airline problem, they are a signal. Now pull back from the individual airports and look at the total picture. 20 years ago, if a family anywhere in the world was planning a long-haul trip, the United States was the near-automatic answer. New York, Los Angeles, Orlando. The conversation started and ended in America. The same family today is having a different conversation. The budget is the same. The desire to travel is identical. The laptop opens, and before America is even considered, the screen shows Tokyo, Seoul, Paris, Toronto, Bali. The number of Asian tourists traveling to the United States has fallen by approximately 46% over the past 2 years. Over that same period, destinations across Europe and Asia have recorded strong growth. The money has not left the travel industry. It has changed direction. If 100 people used to put the United States at the top of their international travel list, close to half of them are now placing it third or fourth, or removing it entirely. Countries that used to take weeks to process visas have rebuilt their systems around same-week approvals. The decisive factor at the margin is always the simplest one. Which destination removes the most friction between decision and arrival? That destination wins. Every time. Think about what the United States actually is as a global brand. It does not need an introduction in any country on earth. The flag lands before the marketing campaign. The cultural output, the skylines, the mythology, all of it travels ahead of any promotional spend. There is no comparable brand recognition anywhere else on the planet. But brand recognition and brand preference are two entirely separate measurements. From Honolulu to Denver, from Portland to Philadelphia, airports that anchor the country's entire tourism economy have recorded international passenger declines ranging from 40% to 75% compared to pre-pandemic baselines. Hundreds of international routes have been suspended or eliminated. In terminal after terminal, the lights in the international wing are on because no one thought to turn them off, not because the passengers are there. Three forces are converging to produce this outcome. The first is the entry experience. Compared to competing destinations, the U.S. visa and customs process is significantly more complex, less predictable, and more time-consuming. For travelers choosing between a destination that takes 2 days to enter and one that takes 4 months, the decision tends to resolve itself. The second is the perception environment. International media coverage of American conditions has generated a sustained and largely unfavorable impression in key tourism source markets. The coverage does not reflect the full reality of daily life across 330 million people. But in tourism decisions, the impression is the product. That is not a political statement, it is a market observation. The third is the cost structure. The total price of a comparable travel experience in the United States now exceeds the equivalent in most competing international destinations. When the premium is not matched by a clearly differentiated outcome, the premium erodes the booking. No single one of these factors is decisive alone. All three together form a compounding barrier that is shifting global tourism flows quietly but measurably away from American airports. No single one of these factors needs a political solution. All three need a practical one. The American dream is still being sold. It now comes with conditions that were not previously part of the transaction. The processing fees are real, the waiting periods are real, the cost gap is real, and the global traveler has noticed every single one of them. The real question is not whether this is happening. We just walked through 15 airports that answered that question with hard data. The real question is what specifically has to change to reverse the direction, and whether the will to make those changes exists before the empty seats become a permanent feature of American international aviation. We just walked through 15 airports, 15 different cities, 15 different economies and identities. But one pattern showed up at every single stop without exception. The seats are emptying. The international gates are quieting down. The footfall that once made American airports the most vital transit network on Earth is measurably contracting across the board. This is not irreversible. Brands recover, trust gets rebuilt, processes get streamlined, costs respond to competitive pressure. But none of that happens until the diagnosis is honest. And the honest diagnosis from these 15 airports is that the United States is losing ground as a global travel destination across multiple dimensions at the same time. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If you had one lever to pull first, what would it be? Fix the visa process, address the cost structure, work on the international perception problem, rebuild the airport experience from the ground up. Leave your answer below. And if you have traveled through any of these airports recently, either arriving into the US or leaving it, tell us what you experienced. Real data from real travelers matters more than any think tank report. If this analysis was worth your time, subscribe to Atlas News Report. We cover the economic and structural shifts happening across the United States and the global economy. No spin, no agenda, no softening the numbers to make anyone more comfortable. The data tells the story. Our job is to read it clearly. See you in the next video.